Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in this roundtable discussing hyper disruption in healthcare. My name is Jessica Khalif, Senior Marketing Manager at Conduent, and I'll be moderating today's call. Before we get started, two housekeeping notes. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A, and we will discuss them at the end of today's call. And I wanted to let you know that this will be recorded. Kicking off our call will be Sheila Kerr, Global Leader of Healthcare Clients at Conduent. Sheila.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. I am Sheila Kerr. I am President and Global Lead of Commercial Healthcare at Conduent. With us is Charlene Lee. Charlene is an expert in disruption and transformation, and as well as leadership. She is a New York Times best-selling author of Groundswell. Also with us is Jim Moore. Jim is Vice President of Member Services with Humana. Partha Bose, who is GM of Document Management and Automation here at Conduent. And Jim and Partha will be participating in the roundtable later on in the webinar, discussing advancement in automation and technology during the pandemic. And I'm going to hand it over to Charlene.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And thank you everyone for joining today. I'm going to be kicking off for a few minutes talking about some trends that I'm seeing in disruption in healthcare to go into a roundtable discussion with Jim and Partha. So when I think about disruption in healthcare, we oftentimes can look at the year past and look at all the disruptions and say, my goodness, we have been through so much. And at the same time, you look back to where we were just a few months ago and where we've come. It's been tremendous, the amount of change and so much that we have gone through. And the way I think about disruption is that it is an opportunity for change. While we're going through disruption, it is incredibly hard. It is gut-wrenching. And yet we do it sometimes because we have to, because of circumstances. But increasingly, we're also going through it because we want to. We're actually bringing the disruption upon ourselves because we think it's going to be good. It's going to be better for the people who we are working with, our patients. And then we also believe that it is going to be good for the organization and ourselves as employees and leaders. And so when I think about the disruptions, there are three that I want to talk about today. These are the three challenges, especially when we're thinking about the digital space. The first one is the rising sense of expectations from patients. They have been through the ringer over the past year. They've learned a lot. We have learned a lot. And we need to recalibrate around what those expectations are. Of course, we want to talk about the digitalization of organizations themselves, but I want to take a little deeper dive into what does digital transformation look like, the journey and the challenges, but also the opportunities. And then finally, we'll talk about how culture change is happening. And this may seem like, of course, culture is important, but there are ways now that we can actually systematically and strategically change our culture so that it's able to execute on the strategy to meet those patient expectations as quickly as possible. These three areas are all interlinked with each other, but I wanted to spend some time in each of them so we can see how they all interlock in the end. So when I think about patient expectations, there are three expectations that have definitely changed. One is clearly access. The fact that you can now potentially connect with your provider anywhere and at any time. And they also expect that to happen with the healthcare plans, that they can access it in any medium that they want to, even if it's on places like Instagram or maybe even TikTok. As we begin to explore the ways that people want to connect, we have to think beyond just the in-person or even just telehealth on the computer, through our mobile devices, through different channels. Wherever patients are, they expect that they should be able to reach out and be able to connect with all of their healthcare providers across the entire span of the experience. The other thing that patient experiences have changed is that they want it fast. They want it now. Curbside delivery has trained them to expect that I can call, I can text, I can go onto my device, on my website, onto the web browser, and be able to get something, and within hours be able to get it either delivered to my door. I can drive by and have it delivered to my hand. And so healthcare across the entire system, from the access to the doctors, but also to the prescriptions, to the devices that we want to have, should be literally at our fingertips and available to us within hours, if not minutes. And the third expectation is that it's going to be personalized. We know about the ability to track your health, to monitor it. But what are you doing with all that information as a health company, as a health plan, as my healthcare provider? How are you using that to make my experience, to make my health better? How are you creating a digital twin so that it can model and understand and anticipate what changes I should be making today to be a healthier person in the future? This proactiveness around personalization is what people are expecting, because they get it in almost every other aspect of their lives. So why can't I get that in my healthcare system too? Of course, there are significant challenges to doing this, given the fact that our healthcare systems are in such disparate different parts of the value chain, different data platforms. And of course, there are permissions and around personalization, around how that information is being used, who has access to it, and in the end, how can I protect it? So what are the ways to look at and understand patients better? They're changing so quickly, so how do you stay on top of it? I recommend using something I call an empathy map. And the idea is that I can go and describe who my future customer is, who my future patient is. You put that patient in the middle here, and then you describe 4 things about them. What is it that they say? What do they do? What do they think? And how do they feel? And then if that's the case, the base case for today, think about after they engage with you, after they've interacted with you, what would that map look like? How would they say, what would they say differently, do differently, think differently, and feel differently because of what you have done and created in that experience with them? And this comes back, all of it comes back to your organization. Is everyone clear in your organization about how this is all going to happen? And when I think about that, there are 3 questions that every single employee should be able to answer. And this is what I typically do when I begin an engagement with an organization. I'll go in a little bit early and just wander around, asking people these 3 questions and see if they can answer them. Who's our future customer? Who is that patient that we want to be able to reach? Not just the ones we have today, but also how will they change and evolve? Can we describe that in great detail, even if it's just in these broad terms of what they say, think, feel, and do? What is our strategy as an organization to be able to meet those needs? We can do anything, but we can't do everything. So what will we do and what we won't do? So what's that strategy? How are we going to execute on that? And then third, and very importantly, what do I, as that person, as an employee in this organization, what is my contribution to making that strategy work? When everyone is clear about who this patient is, what our strategy is to meet them, and then very importantly, what my individual role will be in making that strategy happen. These 3 things are absolutely key in aligning the organization around the outcomes you want to have for your patients. So let's move on to digitalization. When I think about digital transformation, one of the pieces of research is to say that it's not one size fits all, the same for everybody. In our research at Altimeter, we found that there were 5 stages that organizations typically go through. And it broke it up for the healthcare companies that we interviewed, and most organizations, by far the most, are in stage 3. And compared to all the other industries we studied, healthcare was most likely to be in stage 3, least likely to be in stages 4 and 5. In stage 3, the focus is very much on digitizing the operations. It's very focused on very specific departments and taking information like documents, the welcoming screens that you have, the engagements that you have with patients, and be able to put that in a digital way so it's no longer analog, and reduces the strain on people, smooths out the experience, and also makes the back end processing so much smoother. What's interesting is that many healthcare plans and organizations stop at stage 3. They feel like we've done this, we've done the heavy lifting. Aren't we done yet? And the reality is the real power comes when you're actually connecting all of these disparate departments together to create a seamless experience for your patients. They oftentimes get tossed from one place to the other, have to restart things. And when you break down these walls between silos, you actually are creating a better experience. And when that happens at stage 4, then at stage 5, this is where we see an acceleration into growth opportunities. Now, one of the things that I often get asked is, what are people working on? And I cut our data for just the healthcare companies, and the vast majority of them are, again, focusing on modernizing that IT infrastructure. And the purpose of this is primarily to increase agility, to be able to move faster, to be able to respond to the changing patient expectations. Again, you never know where they're going to go. We're making some bets, but we also need to know that our legacy platforms will be able to be flexible in the face of all these changes. The second area, though, is also looking at the operational agility. The thing here about digital transformation is that it's not just about the technology. It's just as much, if not more so, about the people and the policies and the procedures that also have to change. It's about changing the mindset of how we're going to work with patients, all your different members, to say, we're going to be here for you no matter where you want us to be. And everything else after that is also very important, but these two things, I think, are the most important areas to focus on, not just the IT, but also the people and the processes that you have to transform. The last area that one other thing about the digital transformation, we oftentimes talk about silos. And I just want to take a minute here. The goal here is not to break down the silos. The silos inside of departments are extremely important because that's where your functional work gets done. All the operations, all of the detailed knowledge and the perfecting of all of those procedures to make it the best experience. So this is not about tearing down those silos because you need silos to store the grain, right? Instead, it's more about putting windows between these silos. How can we punch windows between different departments so that the customers, your patients, and your members can flow seamlessly through them along with their data, the information. So it feels like one organization to them rather than all these disparate departments. In the beginning, you may be punching a small hole and then yelling at each other to be able to pass that customer through. But over time, you'll build the IT connections, the APIs, those conduits between all these platforms and departments and be able to start systematically and intentionally build these connections. The mistake I oftentimes see people doing is that because those connections aren't there from an IT and technology perspective, they wait. They wait to even just begin to open those windows and literally shout at each other, passing in the information and passing those customers back and forth to create that seamless experience. I encourage you, don't wait. Punch in those windows. Understand where those connections need to be made. Figure out how to do this in a batch basis, on a manual basis, and then build those IT digital conduits. Because that work is extremely important, again, to tie those platforms together. All right, let's go on to the last area, which is around culture change. Culture is one of those things where people feel like this is an immovable force, a mass, that it is really difficult to change. And yet culture is probably the most important thing to focus on. When you think about the biggest challenges and the biggest disruptions, it's going to come from you being able to change and understand and change your culture. And the way to think about this is to think about culture as made up of two things. It's about beliefs, and it is about the behaviors. It is what we say about each other, about what we believe in and how we're going to act that defines our culture. And if you don't like the culture that you have, feel like there are things that you need to change, then think about changing those beliefs and changing those behaviors that are associated with them. Just to give you an idea from my research, I found that there are 3 beliefs that are common to disruptive organizations. And they are, first, openness, that there is information sharing. There's openness in the decisions, how they're being made. And what openness does, it creates transparency. It creates accountability. There's no place for people to hide. And it also builds trust. When you build the scaffolding around openness to allow people to have that accountability and to build that trust, everything moves faster because you're not wondering what's really going on here. What are the politics going on? It's out in the open and you can discuss it. It's ways to have healthy conflict, to have conversations in ways that you couldn't before. But it begins with this fundamental belief that openness is a good thing. The second belief is around agency, that every single employee has the ability to act like an owner, that with the right information, with an understanding of what you're trying to achieve with the strategy, that if they have the agency to make decisions, then they'll be the ones who can be closest to the patients, to your members, and then be able to respond to those needs and actually say, hey, I know that we can fix this. I have the ability now to act like an owner, to make decisions within certain parameters to be able to make this right. And then the third area is a bias for action. This belief says, I know that our members are moving faster and faster away from us. They are changing so quickly. We can't wait to make things perfect before we decide to act. Culturally, we have to be able to act, even if you don't have perfect information, because along the way, we'll make mistakes and we'll learn from them. And it's so difficult because as healthcare providers in the health space, we're told and we learn to do no harm. And we take that to heart in all areas of the practice. And so oftentimes we take that to such an extreme that we won't try anything new, even though the new solution, the new service, the new offering may be better for our members and our patients. And so the bias for action understands that no matter how we're actually moving, that because of the relationship, we're going to be moving further and further and faster than we ever felt comfortable doing. Excuse me. So to ask yourself, a key question to ask yourself is, what are the beliefs that are holding you back? What are the things that you say to yourselves that are no longer serving you? These beliefs may be things like, we need permission before we can act. We need to have all of the answers. I'm just a fill in the blank, and I don't have any power to create that change. Or we have to all agree. If these are things that you're saying and you know they're holding you back, then we agree with each other that we're not going to believe these things anymore. We're not going to behave based on those beliefs, and instead replace them with new beliefs that are going to move you forward to be more disruptive. In the end, I think if you look at all of these 3 things, they require one key element, and that is that you move out of your comfort zone. Because it's when you move out of your comfort zone that the real change happens. I like to say it's important for you to take yourself and your organizations right up to the very edge, the edge of where you feel comfortable, where you feel just almost at the very tip of losing control. And then instead of stepping back, stay right there. You know you're on firm ground. You know you're safe. And that's where you want to be, though, because when you're at that edge, pursuing the biggest disruptions, that's where the magic will happen. That's where the change will actually happen. Again, I would say disruption is an opportunity for change. And I encourage you to stay in touch. This is my contact information. I do put this up here for a reason. I want to hear from you. And I do mean this sincerely. I want to hear what's going on, how it's working, what's not working, what are the challenges, because this is how I learn and do my research. And if you'd like copies, again, you'll get it from Conduit, but you can see more information as well as other resources to help you on your disruption journey at charlenelee.com/conduit. All right, so at this point, what I'd like to do is move it over to a discussion with our panelists. And I'd like to open it up first to Jim Moore, who's the VP of Member Services at Humana. Jim, I have a question for you, and especially in terms of what you all did with COVID. What did you do to adapt to COVID, especially around member services and operations? What worked? What didn't work? And what are you keeping in place from that time before? What are you doing really radically differently today?
Yeah, absolutely, Charlene. Hey, I appreciate the question. And looking at this headshot here on the slides, it reminds me one of the first things I learned how to do was cut my own hair. You can see I've gone much shorter than the headshots. But we had to be scrappy. We had to learn things. We had to improvise on the fly. I remember March of 2020. We were getting ready for the pandemic. And then overnight, we moved 1,000 people to work at home. We did it in about a day and a half. Obviously, it took some preparedness, but it changed our culture for the next year and a half, I guess year and 3 months to date, but really are doing things quite different. I sort of think about 3 areas when I think about sort of what the pandemic did for us. The first is really the member experience. One thing that I don't think anyone has forgotten yet is the isolation we all felt when we were in our homes. We couldn't go to the grocery store. We couldn't go to the barber. We couldn't do those things that we normally could do. For our most fragile members of the healthcare system, those in low income, those who are elderly, those who have high health conditions, that's their normal. We lived a day, we lived several weeks in their lives. And how do we take that learning that we all learned and apply it to how we go deliver services to that population that, frankly, we sat in their shoes for a while. They are, as things start to open back up, we start to go out, we start to do things that group that doesn't have the mobility because of their health or economic reasons is still living a life that we lived. And so how do we learn from that? The second really is around operational resiliency. Pre-pandemic, most of the drivers were around efficiency. How do we do it for less? How do we do it faster? And when the pandemic hit, we realized that resiliency, operational sustainability was very important. Typically in a crisis, you do a couple of things. You can move locations, right? If you got a hurricane or a earthquake, you move to another spot. You move associates into the office, or you move associates out of the office. In this pandemic, we had to go out of the office and then stay in our homes for a long time. And so we had to keep up the data centers. We had to build backup plans. And we spent a lot of time going through and understanding what could break. And then do we have a second and a third option if it does break? For example, servers go out and the fax lines don't work. What's our backup? If you remember, there was a terrorist attack in Nashville around Christmas. It took out our feed with CMS. We couldn't process enrollment applications. What was our backup? Right? So lots of empowerment, lots of brainstorming around what's our second and third option should something go out. And it was a year of reacting to things that would happen that we then had to make sure the lights stayed on. And so resiliency, quality, being able to keep the lights on is huge. And then the third really is the associate, the employee experience. 99% of our associates went to work at home. We are still at home. You're looking at, frankly, me in my bedroom on a card table, and you'll notice there's a landline over there, which is my reminder to my team, we need a backup. It usually rings when I'm presenting, so if it does, I'll go back and mute it. But, we are all living this world where we're at home. And frankly, we've gotten pretty good at it. One thing I noticed about 3 or 4 months into it is there are people that I hadn't seen or talked to for a really long time. Waiting in the hallway before a staff meeting, a lot of stuff happens. So I frankly had to start booking one-on-ones sort of before and after work to catch up with folks. We found that people are working about 3 hours longer each day than they did pre-pandemic. And I think we all live where we work today. And we've got to find ways to disconnect and really keep that balance. And then the next thing we've got to figure out is how we transition back into this hybrid space of office and home. One good thing that came from everybody going to home is it's a much more inclusive work environment. Those who were always work at home, the 30 to 50% or more of the organizations now have an equal spot to those who used to be in the conference room during the meetings. So lots of learnings, many things will stay the same. Post-pandemic, with probably the most important things being the focus on resiliency. Never forget what our members, those who are the most vulnerable in the healthcare system, feel, because we felt it, and then making sure we design an associate experience, an employee experience that meets today's needs.
I mean, you make a really good point in your very first thing, which is we now experience ourselves what our most vulnerable members are going through. It sounds like you're still working from home, so that is going to be very present. As things return back to, again, normal, as you go back to work into the office, how do you think you're going to maintain that empathy, that sense? Because again, you're still going to have some people working remotely. You're going back into that messiness of that space. What are your thoughts about how you're preparing for a different type of resilience for the organization?
Yeah, we've changed the questions we ask in our meetings. In addition to the pandemic, we also had lots of social unrest. We now look at race in our analytics to understand if there's bias in the system, not us as a processor, but in the system. And then how can we advocate for the member? We push on the regulators. Here's an example. When everybody went to work at home, the Social Security office closed. No one could go get their Part B as in boy eligibility if they chose to retire during the pandemic. And so we couldn't grant coverage. So we had to push on the regulators, both the Social Security office and also CMS, to waive the rules to let folks have insurance during the pandemic, which is pretty important. And so I think that the lesson we've learned, the way we keep it there is we got to keep asking questions. And from those lessons learned, what can we change at the regulator? What does the demographic, the race, the places, and the racism tell us about this? And then how do we continually advocate for those folks that can't really speak for themselves? Even a very simple enrollment or billing specialist has a mass amount of power when it comes to someone getting care. And how can they be that advocate for that person out there that they may not even know to make sure that they can navigate the system?
Oh, great. Fantastic. I mean, those are fundamental sea changes that you're talking about there. All right. So let's turn over to Partha Bose, who's the General Manager for Document Management and Automation at Conduent. So Partha, you work with a lot of different healthcare players across
Correct.
the space. What technology do you see them, healthcare payers in particular, implementing these days? Where's that focus in that hotspot that they're focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing healthcare payers kind of trying to balance, what they do on a day-to-day basis they have done, and at the same time responding to how the pandemic is changing their work. Say, for example, member self-service. I mean, at the end of the day, the members are a key constituent of any of the healthcare payers. How do you make it easier for the members to interact with the health plans, right? I mean, they are used to interacting with banks or interacting with airlines, but from a payer provider perspective, things have been a little bit behind, and I think that acceleration is starting to happen. How do you make it easier anytime, anywhere? So that's one, definitely something which is happening. Believe it or not, with a lot of our payers, and Jim actually mentioned the word fax, and it still exists, right? I mean, there are faxed authorization requests and all of that going in, and I think that's another area where we are seeing a transformation. Do we need to really do it that way, especially as we are moving into more and more of a touch-free type of an environment. And, the folks are not in the offices anymore. I mean, they are working at home globally, right? So how do you make that transition? Case in point, if you look at enrollments, right? I mean, especially amongst the senior population, if you look at, for example, Medicare Advantage, there's a lot of paper enrollment still over there. How do you get it into, for example, doing that on your mobile phone? I mean, do you really need an agent to come to your home anymore? Probably not. I mean, so how do you do that, more virtually than before? Simple things like, payments. Are we going to ship out checks? Why don't you do electronic payments, especially as the providers are concerned? So I think we are seeing some of those changes. And we have seen it across the spectrum, and some cases we have had some payers who have really stuck to, this is how we do things. And then there are others who are really embracing that here is maybe the pandemic was the inflection point for some of these changes to start happening. And we are actually seeing that happen. And I think there's across the board, there is also, I think there is a push towards speed things up. Does it have to take 30 days for your claim to get paid, or can we actually get it done a lot faster? I mean, these are some of the, the changes that we are, actually seeing, some of our payers. I mean, I think great thing that I have started seeing is earlier I had to write a paper check to, for our portion of the payment back to the provider. I mean, a lot of the payers are saying, okay, click over here. You can pay directly through this particular portal. And that's great. I mean, these are the type of disruptions which should have happened, but actually we are starting to see a lot of these happen at a much faster rate.
Mm-hmm. It was astounding for me to see how many health care providers and the payers really double down on making this as seamless as possible. And the logic and the ideas was, people are going through so much. We need to make it easier.
Absolutely.
Let's take the things. And to what Jim was saying, they switched over in a day and a half. Tremendous change. And I'm saying the payers also making tremendous change. I'm curious, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing the payers have? I mean, there's a lot of ambition to make these changes happen. You mentioned one of them, people saying, well, that's just the way we do things around here, right? Saying that, we've done this for 100 years. We're just going to keep doing it this way. What are some of the challenges that they really have to overcome to really get these changes? Because we all agree they're right things to do, but something keeps holding them back.
Yeah, I think it's part of it is, I mean, as I look across the spectrum of payers, how they are embracing this change and getting change done, some of them I think are struggling with, okay, I mean, you still need your objectives at the end of the year. Okay, I'm a publicly traded company. I mean, there are guidance which we have given. Some of that change, not just, time. I mean, it also takes a lot of investment to be done. And so we are seeing some of that. How do you balance out running your day-to-day and the investments? And some of the is a big cultural change, and I think a lot of the payers, I mean, they're struggling that with the cultural change of how you do things. So that is definitely one. The other is, getting necessary skills available to be able to, implement some of those changes. I mean, I think that is something which they are, quite a few of the payers are definitely struggling. But, the good thing is that at least the vision seems to be there. Now, we are going to see some, the early adopters who are going to be off the gates very quickly and getting some of those changes done, and as opposed to, the ones who are falling behind. And I think we are going to probably see a definite, like a stratification of the pack in terms of the ones who are embracing change and moving forward, which I believe is going to have an impact in terms of the market share, because at the end of the day, the member expectations have changed as they see payers implementing, doing something which is making life easier for them. I think that shift is definitely going to be there.
And what do you think has been accelerated because of the pandemic? Again, there's some things. Again, we talked about some of the challenges, but what do you think really they have accelerated and moved forward faster than you ever thought they would ever do because of the pressures from member expectations?
I think there has been a lot more which has been pushed into self-service. If you look at it, there is a lot of health plans for a lot of stuff. You would have to pick up the phone and make a call instead of being able to, go online and make some of those, get some of the stuff done. And I think that's one area, especially given the operational challenges of a lot of our payers, because folks who are taking phone calls from the members of the providers, I mean, not just in the US, but across the globe, where they are in countries with varying levels of, the pandemic, how it had impacted them. So they were kind of forced to get into more of the self-service to be able to do things digitally. So that is one area we have definitely seen a movement and an acceleration. And it's kind of changing the landscape, how some of the services are being provided also. Like from a service provider side, as well as, the payers and from the provider and from the providers. But that access to information is definitely changing. That has definitely been the first of the mark.
Great. Well, I'm going to just pull together a couple of thoughts from what Jim and Partha has, and then we want to open it up for any questions that you have to any of us. There were three things that I think we're taking away from this discussion, just my presentation and what Jim and Partha shared. The first one is that connection back to who these patients and the members are. I love the way that Jim was saying we ask different questions now. Partha was talking about how understanding the need for self-service is a key part of the acceleration around digital transformation. So just really doubling down on truly understanding, taking the time to understand where the members are, what are their needs, how are they changing, and developing much deeper empathy for them. I think one of the best ways to do that is to have that curiosity and to ask those questions, as Jim was talking about, but also couple that with humility that says we may have been really good in the past, we're excellent at what we do, but we have no idea. We really don't know how all the answers. So we may have an inkling, an idea of where it is, but we don't know for sure 100%. And that humility will keep you asking the questions, developing that curiosity, and then having empathy for the members and what their changes are. The other thing I would say is that I think, as you heard, there's tremendous need for the data and the simplification of all of these things around resilience, but also what Jim talked about with the resilience, more so than the efficiency, because you've got to be there for people. But it's also the simple things, being able to take care of things from a self-service perspective and be able to look at the gamut of all the things you can do around digital transformation and really understand where are the simple wins, but also those simple wins may have huge implications on the back end of your culture and then also how you want to be focusing on things. And the last point, again, just to emphasize the tremendous culture changes that are happening. I can't think of a single organization that it will think, we even begin to think that they're going to go back to the same culture that they had before. We have all been fundamentally changed. Our members have been changed. Our employees have been changed. We as leaders have been changed. And to acknowledge that and to understand that we're going to craft something new together and be open to what the options are that will come before us. As my last point before we open up a Q&A, I want to take you back to March of 2020, when there was great, tremendous disruption, tremendous uncertainty, a huge amount of fear. We had no idea what was going to happen, how long we'd be in this. And we rose to that occasion. We transformed in ways we could have never imagined. We made changes in days that we thought would have taken years. And when we did that, because we had no choice, imagine what we could do if we had a choice. It's ironic that when we have a choice, we tend to do less. So what is that fire? What are the things that we do to make it as viable and to create that focus in the moment today that the pandemic forced us to do, but now we can do this for ourselves. And the only way I have been able to see organizations do this is to be crystal clear about who your members are, where they're going, and how you're going to meet them there. That's the only way I've been able to see organizations move as fast as they can, move faster than they ever have been comfortable with. All right, so I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Jessica, who is going to be asking some questions that they have some coming in from the chat, I believe. So Jessica, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you to all our speakers as well for participating today. We have a good amount of questions that have come in. I'd like to have Jim Moore from Humana start first. We have a question that came in that is, when developing newer applications, such as transforming paper insurance enrollment to digital form, can you explain the starting point and the further steps towards reaching the goal?
Yeah, absolutely. And for the record, I hate paper applications, just to get that out there. And that was one of the good things with the pandemic. application, we did a couple things. Frankly, we called our partners at Conduent, and we built a bot together that can read paper apps, handwritten apps, actually better than people can. And so what used to take 8 minutes to key now takes 8 seconds to key. It knows agent tendencies. So if sales agent Jim versus sales agent Charlene do their Ds differently, the bot knows that. It then puts it in the digital format, and then it rolls over to us to enroll. And so, as you think about it, I would go backwards, forward. Where does it need to go? What does it need to look like? And then have that be the output. There's 80-some fields on Medicare Advantage application. Each one needs a bit of programming from Medicare ID to plan to signature. Get some smart folks who can do that programming and make sure you test. But when you get it right, it's pretty powerful. And then build a backup. Have another bot on another platform that does the same thing, because even bots take vacation days. And so make sure you have that resiliency there as well. Parth, I don't know if there's anything I missed there, but that was a key partnership that we did, frankly, pre-pandemic. It ended up working out really nicely.
Yep. No, I mean, nothing to add over there, Jim. But I think that's definitely that's definitely the way to go. And it has been that's something which has been very successful.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Partha. This next question seems like a really great one for Sheila. I'd love you to answer this. Can you explain about Conduent and its role in bringing disruption in terms of new solutions, helping physicians develop new interventions, and helping patients engage in their care?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. So digital transformation is all about faster access to care and services. And we are working with, so we had 2 come up recently. One was one of our payers who said, our members are having a hard time, depending on demographics. Some demographics, they don't have vehicles. They may not have public transportation. Some demographics that are elderly may be in that same situation or can't drive anymore. And they said, you have a transportation group, and we're looking to do something that's Uber-like, to help these members get to the care or the services that they need. So we're working through that process now about what that would look like, both from a digital standpoint, a digital app for the younger demographic, and for the older demographic, what would the outreach be for that? The other ask that we've had recently is one of our providers who's talking about post-surgical care. So in a managed care setting, it's really changing the dynamic of how patients are cared for. So one of the things we suggested was, in a digital telehealth aspect of it, we could potentially build in a digital device for the patient to have. And with the post-care for a period of time, it could be 30 days, it could be 60 days, it could be 10 days, whatever they need, having access to an RN or a agent that can walk them through post-care. Sometimes that may be transferring them to a doctor if the need is something that only the provider could do. So just getting that information back and not having them go back to their primary care physician or back to the hospital organization that gave them that care. The other thing we're looking at is, there's so many monitors and devices. And as we talk to our provider clients, they're talking about, where Conduent can assist them in managing care around those devices. So there's a lot happening. Again, digital transformation should not just be about getting digital applications and products to the marketplace. It's how we help our clients get faster access and care for their members or their patients.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's session. A replay will be available to everyone who attended as well as who registered in the next few days. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.